Thanks, Carolyn. And actually, Dr. Johnson and I do go way back, many years, but that's okay. We won't tell you how far. But it's good to be at Tulane. Thank you for having me. I submitted these objectives, and I'm not going to read them because I'm going to take them one at a time. And hopefully you'll leave with a sort of a comprehensive view of, what is driving this obesity epidemic and maybe perhaps what we can do about it. Some background on obesity and sort of the physiology and the pathology around it that kind of drives its sort of training forward with no, sight for us to sort of make it stop. It's like a train on a track that won't stop. And some of it is surrounding something called the fetal programming hypotheses. And so we've kind of adopted in our research this kind of life course, view of how obesity is beginning and being sustained and continuing from one generation to the other. And it's pretty well known now that mother's pregnancy weight is a strong predictor of child's weight. And we know that both under and overnutrition sort of drive future obesity in youth. What we're not so clear about is sort of where this all starts, when's the best time to intervene to stop so the postnatal infant from turning into the early childhood obese person, and what's the role of things like inflammation to the metabolism that's kind of driving obesity, and what about social disadvantage? How's that driving sort of the physiology of stress? And these are some of the questions that we're trying to answer. But it's very complicated, and this is just a beginning of where we think childhood obesity research is going. We don't really know where these arrows are going to take us. Let me put it that way. But it's our sort of ideas at the moment. The fetal origins hypothesis that came out a very long time ago, called the Barker hypothesis, and there's both an overnutrition and an undernutrition component of it. Whereas low birth weight babies are born highly susceptible to insulin resistance and obesity, and high birth weight babies are highly susceptible to hypertension and obesity. And I went back into the literature to see what's happening now in the last couple of years, and it still holds true. And overnutrition seems to be more of the culprit now than the undernutrition. And we do think that there is a strong molecular component, overexpression of genes. And some of the work we're doing along those lines is looking at how being overweight when you're young, how that alters genes to kind of force you into a condition later in life. In addition, tobacco is a real issue, and it's just now being linked more to metabolism dysfunction and obesity. It used to be mostly to cognitive impairments and other issues in the offspring. And maternal smoking during pregnancy is associated with shorter birth length and faster height growth in infancy, and later slower growth. Paternal smoking is also an issue from the point of view of secondhand smoke. And so here's a study that was done, and it's very interesting because they actually used some sophisticated technology to look at the amygdala, which is the part of the brain that controls impulses. And they looked at it both in obese and sort of healthy weight children, and then they looked at fat intake and the amygdala size. And what you can see from the bar graphs is that the above median BMI would be your overweight, and below median BMI would be your healthy weight. And there's a significant difference in amygdala volume in those who were exposed to tobacco versus those who were not. So if your mother smokes, you have a small amygdala. If you have a small amygdala, you have less control over your impulses. Then they looked at fat intake, and basically it was the same thing. There was more fat intake of the exposed versus the non-exposed. So perhaps that impulse control that's lacking is causing overeating, and in particular fat. So that was one study that's recently come out. Adding to this issue of sort of maternal control over the outcomes of overweight babies and youth. Again, Whitaker published this in 2004, that was more than 10 years ago, showing that percentage of newborns obese as preschoolers compared to the mother's weight in the first trimester. Age 2, 3, and 4 years. By age 4, those with overweight mothers were almost 3 times as heavy as those that were not, so a very landmark study. Well, today it's the same thing. In 2013, Lineberry published a study showing that maternal BMI had a stronger influence on BMI growth than paternal BMI. Between 1.5 and 3.5 years, children of overweight women had much higher obesity. Both pre-pregnancy maternal and paternal body mass index were associated with fetal postnatal growth measures in children through 4 years, but maternal obesity is the one's driving it the most, more than the males. That suggests that it's more of a physiological, or perhaps an epigenetic, as opposed to environment in the home. But obesity does start in the womb. We know that women who have higher levels of omega-6 or unhealthy fat are more likely to have obese children 3 years later. There is a couple of studies that suggest that this unhealthy fat consumption promotes an altered genetic profile. And it may explain why each succeeding generation of Americans is getting more obese. So if you think, you know, as one becomes overexposed and becomes overweight, then that mother that's overweight has an overweight child, and so on and so on. Children with altered genetic profiles must be managed throughout life to maintain a healthy weight. One thing that is protective, and there's several more studies than the ones I've listed below here, is breastfeeding. Breastfeeding is associated with a healthy weight later in life. We're not sure if it's the breastfeeding behaviors, because women who breastfeed, they feed their children different than women who bottle feed. Babies who are breastfed behave differently than babies who are fed with a bottle. Or is it the content of the breast milk? We're actually doing a study with Pennington right now, and we're looking at whether mother's fat intake crosses through the breast milk into the baby during breastfeeding, and how that impacts their inflammation, for example. So some of the research we're trying to do is it the quality of the breast milk, or is it the actual quality of the parenting that's making breastfeeding something that we should promote in obviously all women as much as possible for other reasons, but we now know that it is protective for the children as well to prevent obesity. There's a lot of research being done right now, and I actually just got back from a conference, and Dr. Lynn Epstein, who many of you may know, he does a lot of work in childhood obesity for many years. He's doing a lot of work with this as well, looking at food responsiveness. So there's some very good tools to measure how responsive infants and preschoolers and children are to food. So that when you put food in front of a baby, how do they respond to it? Do they get excited? Do they want it? Do they scream and cry because they have some M&Ms in front of them and they want them? Or are they looking at the ceiling and playing with toys? And that's how they sort of measure it. And this was a really well done study of 456 babies. It was twins, discordant twins. And they looked at those who had high food responsiveness versus those who had low food responsiveness, and they tracked from 0 to 15 months their weight gain. And the babies that had the most high food responsiveness, that's the blue curve, also had a higher weight. So Dr. Epstein is actually doing this in preschoolers now, and it's very interesting because he has the same findings in preschoolers. Basically, those who seem to just be so excited when they see food and have temper tantrums are likely to be the most overweight. Another one which is really easy to fix is vitamin D insufficiency, and this has recently been associated with obesity. There's no cause and effect studies, but children who have vitamin D deficiency are known to have a higher risk for obesity. And those who play outdoors less, and watch TV for 2.5 more hours per day are more likely to have vitamin D insufficiency. It's also associated with insulin resistance, high cholesterol, and high blood pressure. So just like, we're driving calcium home in parents, we have to really make them understand that D is equally, if not more important for obesity prevention. We know a lot about physical activities. Here's 4 things about it that you may not know. In adults, there's compensatory mechanisms for eating, and exercise. So if an adult exercises, they're going to compensate by eating more after. This has been pretty well shown in the literature. But in children, it's the opposite. Physical activity actually improves satiety in children. And I'll show you another slide about what else it does as well with respect to food. We know that it improves metabolic health with weight loss, but there are actually studies showing that if you engage in physical activity, even if you don't have any fat change, your metabolism improves, your insulin sensitivity improves. It reduces depression in children. We know it does it in adults, but now we also know it does it in children. And it reduces inflammatory cytokines, and childhood obesity is associated with inflammation and asthma. Now, when I say childhood obesity, that's the range of children from, say, 3 to 18. That's what the studies show, that inflammation is associated with obesity in a large range of overweight children. Keep that in mind because I'm going to show you something a little bit later. So why should healthy and overweight youth exercise? The primary reason, it's not for caloric expenditure, because that's irrelevant in children, again, I'll show you why. But it's because this vigorous intermittent physical activity, it reduces components of the metabolic syndrome, especially in prepubertal youth. And this is very well documented in numerous studies. We know that the reason why children need to exercise is because it promotes metabolic health. Not necessarily reduce obesity, but promotes health. This is a position statement from the American Academy of Pediatrics, which I was very excited to hear. And it was sent out to all sectors of society to make them understand that play, or active play, especially outdoor play, is essential for children, not just to prevent poor metabolic health, but also for improved cognition, emotional development, social skills. And their statement was that, regardless of the socioeconomic status, regardless of the neighborhood you live in, regardless of the schools you go to, that all children should have access to outdoor play. Extremely important. The reason is that because children are not little adults. And like you guys are sitting here, for an hour today listening to me talk, you cannot expect children to do that. Their bodies are not designed that way. They need to move for cognitive development. They learn spatial awareness through moving their hands through space. This is very well documented. So if you allow them to run around the schoolyard moving their hands, they're going to be able to write and read better. They enjoy physical exercise. It's very hard to get adults to go to the gym and do things. They would rather be doing something else. But if you put a child in an area where they can move around, they're going to move around. Think church, think the bank. They're going to play. It fosters healthy emotional development. Children who are confined, it's well known that they have emotional issues later in life. And it's primarily because they can't stay focused for long periods of time. And so if they're forced to do that, it really disrupts their natural sort of development and their natural view of the world. Two things that are really important is that they have a lower oxygen uptake, and so this prevents them from doing exercise where they get in the zone and they can exercise, for long periods of time, because their little systems are immature and they really can't take up as much oxygen as adults can. And they have immature metabolic systems. So their metabolism is very different from adults. And what we know about it is it seems to be prepubertally is when we see the most difference. And once a child sort of enters puberty, everything resets, and by the time they get into adolescence, they really are more like adults. But it's the young child we're talking about here with the immature metabolic system. So we completed over about 9 years 2 studies under the umbrella of the SILLY study. It's a study of insulin sensitivity in Louisiana, low, high, and normal weight prepubertal youth. And we attempted to recruit an equal number of African American and Caucasian children with low and high birth weight. We actually ended up with a very representative population of South Louisiana. It was primarily about 60% Caucasian, about 40% African American, predominantly kind of urban and rural areas. Between sort of Lafayette and as far north as Alexandria and as far south as Golden Meadow and Grand Isle. And they were very representative, so we didn't really have this nice clean cut. And we ended up with 210 as opposed to 400. But the reason why we under-recruited and under-enrolled was because this was the test that they had to participate in. You see that graph right there? It was 2.5 days worth of testing. And I'm only going to go over the tests that I actually have results to show you, but they basically went to the Children's Hospital for a full day, and then another half day, and then they were at the Pennington Biomedical Research Center for a full day. And they actually had all the same tests that the astronauts have before they go into outer space. So we actually give them an astronaut certificate when they're done. But this is one of the tests that we did. It's called mass spectroscopy, and it does use an MRI chamber, and we use a phantom of water to compare lipids inside the liver cells and inside the skeletal muscle cells. And that in adults was known to be highly correlated with impaired insulin sensitivity. And so we were trying to find out, well, where does this start? You know, how young do the children have to be? There had only been one study in adolescents at the time. And again, these were 7 to 9-year-olds, exclusively prepubertal, perfectly healthy. We excluded every known disease and any kind of medication. As a matter of fact, 40% of our eligible population was excluded because they were on ADHD medication. That was eye-opening as well. And we excluded asthmatics, we included any kind of metabolic disease, so very, very healthy children. About 35% of them were overweight at the time, and 65% were healthy weight. And what we found out, and again, this was the exact opposite to what we were seeing in adults and in adolescents, was that inflammation was actually good. So liver fat high liver fat is associated with high diabetes risk. And in adults, it's associated with high inflammation. But according to this graph, we looked at TNF-alpha, which is an inflammatory marker that you can measure in the blood, and then we correlated it with the fat inside the liver cell. It's called intrahepatic lipid. And what we found was we had a significant moderate correlation in the wrong direction. So the more inflammation the child had, the lower their liver fat. So it was the opposite. And we did publish that in Obesity. And this just really sparked our interest. Like, what is it about these healthy prepubertal children that's protective? We don't know, right? So I'm now working with a PhD. She just graduated, Maura Kepper. She actually works with Dr. Thiel here at Tulane as well. And she developed a protocol looking at social disadvantage concentrated index. And it basically measures things like how many are below the poverty line, how many are receiving public assistance, if you're a female head of household, unemployed. So you can actually use census data and look at where a child lives and determine what their social disadvantage index is. So it's a surrogate for poverty. I mean, they like to say that it's sort of highly correlated with SES, but it gives you a lot more information, and you can actually tease out some of these variables. And again, the adult literature suggests that high social disadvantage equals high obesity, equals high risk for diabetes, high inflammation, all those things. And we actually saw the opposite in these prepubertal children. So the same cohort, prepubertal children, BMI Z-score, body fat, and visceral adipose tissue were inversely related. So the more disadvantaged their neighborhood, the healthier they were. Interestingly, the Caucasian children were the most impacted by this, and we don't even know why this is, except that they were the one who were primarily female head of households in the cohort we had. They were unemployed and they were young. And this was post-Katrina. So we have to factor that in because there were a lot of African American families that had not yet moved back. So there was some of that as well. And this wasn't urban New Orleans, understand. This was Southeast Louisiana. So this is a Louisiana population, not a New Orleans population. So again, we don't know why this is going on. Looks like children are protected against inflammation. Looks like they're protected against social disadvantage. When does that protection go away? Could that be the critical period that we need to intervene? That's what I think you'll conclude at the end of my lecture. This is something that I just pulled up because I was interested in this phenomenon of, you know, adults being told to exercise to burn calories when after they exercise they go eat everything that they burned, and this is pretty well documented. So what does the child literature say? Now, I haven't done any studies in this regard, but what has been shown in several papers is that the appetite hormones increase following physical activity in children, and that's compensatory to protect them so they grow. So it's supposed to increase. They will adapt food intake to maintain a normal energy balance. That's why exercise could never be used for weight loss in children, because they're gonna adapt, okay? They are gonna have nutritional adaptations to both physical and sedentary activities. So if they are sedentary, they adapt their nutrition accordingly. They eat less, and if they have physical activity, they eat more. But it doesn't promote weight gain like in adults. That's the difference. That's the difference. And there are a few studies, I don't have them here, that actually show that some children, the older children, the ones that are post-pubertal, they eat less after exercise. And there were at least 3 studies that showed in athletes they eat less after exercise. But again, these were older children. Prepubertal children, they're going to compensate. They're in a fast period of growth. prepubertal adolescence? Maybe not, maybe not. Just, you know, helped us to sort of rethink it. Now, obese children are even more different than adults because they're even different from healthy weight children. And I've spent most of my career trying to document this and make people realize this because I've worked with severely obese children for many years and I've got to observe what they can and cannot do. And I'm going to go through each one of these bullets with an example in the literature of you know, the information that we do have. We know that excess fat in children negatively affects their fundamental motor skill performance. This has been shown in numerous studies, not a few, numerous. We know that if a child is not overweight and if they have normal physical activity opportunities, that they have superior gross motor coordination, much better than adults, especially old adults like me. You know, so it's normal for a child who is not overweight to just have really great coordination, to be able to do anything agile with their body. But if they're obese, a group of 43-year-olds with an average weight of 40, they took twice as long to get out of a chair as those who were healthy weight. And some of the things that we see is sort of flat feet, collapsed arches, either Blount's disease or intern knees, and this Professor Steele who published a study, she said they're just uncomfortable all the time. So it's a real issue trying to get overweight children to exercise as healthy weight children do. They're also very metabolically compromised, and this is actually hot off the press. This is Mara's dissertation, and we're working on the, we've submitted the paper for review. And basically, when you look at our cohort, now these are those metabolic healthy children when they were prepubertal. We've now brought 76 of them back as adolescents. So now we're looking at adolescents. So these are the same kids that, you know, had those sort of unusual findings when they were young. And we've noticed that healthy weight versus overweight versus obese, all of the metabolic parameters are much worse than the severely obese. And this is well documented in the literature, but this is just our findings, which sort of confirm everything about metabolic health. More than that, when these children were prepubertal, we demonstrated, if you look at the insulin sensitivity, that the obese children in our cohort, about 35%, had almost 2 times lower insulin sensitivity than the non-obese. Also, both their IHL is the liver fat, so that's lipids inside the liver fat. IMCL is actually lipids inside the soleus muscle cell. And what we showed here was that the healthy weight kids had far less noise, lipid inside their cells than the healthy kids, than the obese kids. You can see the IHL in the obese kids was almost 3 times higher than the non-obese. Again, the first time we've ever documented this finding, and we're just about to look at these results in the adolescents, and I don't have the findings yet, but I can't wait. And we're trying to recruit another 25 of them before we do. And these obese children are physically compromised, and this is actually my dissertation. That's how old it is, and this has been repeated numerous times by other scientists. And basically, I categorize the children as being severely obese, and that's the red bar. Obese, above the 95th percentile, is the yellow line. Overweight, not yet obese, is the green, and then healthy is the blue line, and that was a bunch of children who were healthy weight, who were actually swimmers. And I had them walk on a treadmill at different speeds, and I collected their oxygen. So it's a stress test, basically. The more oxygen you consume for any given amount of work, the less fit you are, okay? The less able you are to exercise. So when they were standing, see at 0, the graph on the left, when they were standing, they were all taking in around the same amount of oxygen. But the minute they began to walk at 2.5 miles per hour, the more overweight children were taking in twice as much oxygen as the healthy weight children. And by the time they got to 3.5 miles per hour, which is not even a brisk walk, the severely obese children, the red line, they had basically hit the wall and they couldn't go anymore. It's because they had to carry their weight. They were doing so much more work because they were carrying their weight. When I divided the results by their weight, all of the differences went away. So it led me to do something when the children were in clinic with me, is I'd bring in 2 10-pound bags of potatoes. And after they'd been in the program about a month and some of them had lost 5 or 10 or 20 pounds, you know, I'd say, pick up these 2 10-pound bags of potatoes and run across the room. Now put them down and run across the room. How does it feel? So, you know, just losing 10 pounds is a dramatic change for these kids. It enables them to be much more physiologically capable of doing exercise. The other problem, and I'll wrap up the overweight versus healthy weight children, is that the comorbidities of obesity, and there are many, further limit their exercise tolerance. And it's such that we really recommend that activities for overweight children stay below that ventilatory threshold. So stay under vigorous exercise, because vigorous exercise is going to make their ventilation go up, make them take in all that oxygen, and make them hit the wall. Physical fitness and sedentary time mediate asthma risk through central obesity. We found that out. So we were wondering, well, how does asthma risk, you know, factor into obesity? Then many children with asthma have obesity, and many children with obesity have asthma, and it's through actually central adiposity. And the findings that are coming out in the literature are that there's this mechanical compression of the thoracic cage that's impaired. So they can't breathe as well as we do because they have too much weight on their diaphragm. Secondly, they have pro-inflammatory mediators. So they have this circulating inflammation that's driving them to be metabolically impaired, which is limiting their exercise tolerance. Extreme obesity limits mobility and causes discomfort, and it prevents safe and effective exercise. And so, in conclusion, many researchers are now saying that in obese children, you really need to modify diet first, get them to actually get some of the weight off, and then gradually introduce exercise. And this is really going totally against the grain for obesity prevention, because we all know that physical fitness is known to prevent obesity and comorbidities, but this is for children who are already overweight, and it's something for us to think about. So all this physiology and pathophysiology I just presented to you, we have a phenotype for childhood obesity. You know, it's basically, it starts in the womb, it's further pushed through lack of breastfeeding and not enough opportunities for physical activity, so their metabolism gets impaired, unhealthy processed foods. And so we really need an interdisciplinary approach. This is well known. And this is why, because we know these pre and postnatal factors are there. We know that it crosses generations, and we know that each succeeding generation has gotten more and more overweight. But the red line at the bottom, all of these things are modifiable, and they're targets. So basically, tobacco use, pregnancy weight, infant feeding, child nutrition, and physical activity can all be modified. So why aren't we doing it, and why isn't it working? This is why. Parents don't think their kids are overweight. So parents of overweight or obese children think their children are healthy weight, and parents of healthy weight children think their kids are too skinny. So we did some work along that as well. What are parents doing because they think their kids are normal and they don't think it's important? For example, if they live in a neighborhood with high incivility, so a neighborhood with a lot of crime, a lot of graffiti, blighted houses, right? They have lower collective efficacy. They have more avoidance behavior. So they allow their kids to play outside, but then they don't let them play anywhere but in the yard. So they don't let them play at friends' houses or at parks. It's avoidance. Defensive is basically they protect them from all opportunities for physical activity unless they're with them. And again, this is the work of Mara's paper, and which she just finished defending. And we're really excited about these results because it's the first time we've ever shown that parents perceive collective efficacy on how collective their neighborhood is driving them to either, you know, let the child play outside or not, to constrain physical activity. And this was actually in adolescents, not young children. We think the results would have even been more powerful in young children because adolescents have some autonomy. So there are some barriers to engaging in physical activity so that we can get those healthy metabolisms, and restricted play spaces are that. And here's some things that we have thrown out there that parents might be able to do. So they can do some stuff indoors, like develop an imagination station. They can turn on the stereo instead of the TV and teach the children to dance, think Dancing with the Stars. They can create outdoor areas in their vicinity, their backyard, where they can protect the children, but they need movables, pull toys, scooters, balls, wagons, things for the kids to play with. And they can impose something called the 30-minute rule, and that's for both homework and fun computer time and and screen time, so that after 30 minutes the children have to actually get up and move around. And so we're going to, and there's a lot of scientific support for what I just put up there. So it's just not, you know, our ideas from working with children. There's studies published that these approaches would be effective, and cause and effect studies, experimental design showing that dance is an effective way to promote metabolic health. So I think we should give children a break, and because after 30 minutes they really can't concentrate anymore. After 30 minutes I don't think y'all can either, so I wanted to ask everybody to stand up. And arms up in the air and do some about music is that if you play music, people are more likely to exercise longer, and they're more likely to, and this one's not working. Anyway, this was Pharrell Williams' Happy. Thank y'all very much for that little interlude. Sometimes when technology doesn't help, we move to the next slide. Okay, so that's how I teach the 30-minute rule, and so that's just a way for me to impose on parents, especially younger children, the importance for them to get up and move around periodically throughout the day. Not because it burns calories, but because it's going to improve their metabolic health, and it's going to improve their emotional and cognitive development. So now I'm going to move to just identifying some targets. So now that you know how big the problem is, and I gave you one kind of idea of what parents can do at home, I actually published this perspective in childhood obesity, and it goes along the lines of what I was talking about before. And I actually pinpointed a time period, which was my mother's time period. And it basically goes like this. Think Mad Men, right? And you see all these women smoking cigarettes, right? And the guys are primarily working, and the women are in the home. And especially in some cultures, they're not using birth control, so they're basically smoking cigarettes and getting pregnant, and the doctor tells them, keep smoking the cigarettes because it's going to keep you thin so you can get in that little small waist dress when you get out. And then they're discouraged from breastfeeding. So this was like the 50s and the 60s in America, so again, my mom's generation. So therefore, they were having a baby every 15 months because breastfeeding is protective of pregnancy, and they weren't breastfeeding the baby, so there's a double whammy. The woman was undernourished. She wasn't gaining enough weight. She had tobacco in his system, which was a toxin. The daddy was probably smoking in the home too. And then the baby wasn't breastfed. And it resulted in the thrifty phenotype. So the baby was underweight, but the weight was muscle. So they had sarcopenia. They had very little skeletal muscle. And in some studies, they actually weighed the kidneys and the liver and even the heart, and it was underweight. So that is a physiological phenomena that happened. But what we didn't know back then was that there was also some genetic alterations going on. So that particular offspring, which is my generation, were then set up to become overweight young. So that's why my generation, the women that are sort of in their 50s and 60s now, 40s, 50s, and 60s now, they are basically struggling with their weight. They probably were overweight when they had their children, okay? Unless they were avid exercisers and they ate really, really, really healthy. But remember, we were all fed processed food on top of it. Their babies are then the other phenotype, the overnourished babies. So we have thin women having thin babies who become overweight. Those overweight women then have overweight babies. They then have super overweight children, and then that's when in vitro comes along, because we have so many overweight women, and basically they can't get pregnant, so they go seek pregnancy. I'm actually doing a study with Leanne Redmond at Pennington along these lines. We're looking at assisted fertility versus non and seeing if it affects metabolic health. And we know that IVR is associated with poor metabolic health and obesity. So knowing that, how do we turn it around? And what's the target? And so the targets are that I think we need to implement intense nutrition, physical activity, and behavioral counseling education during the first visit to the OBGYN. And that actually may be too late, because the literature suggests that the woman actually has to have healthy behaviors a year before she gets pregnant. She doesn't necessarily have to be perfect weight. She could even be a little overweight, but she definitely has to be eating healthy and physically active about a year before. And it needs to continue till the child enters puberty, okay? The next one is we need to target girls who are about to enter childbearing age. And we know that we have a lot of overweight adolescent females in this country, especially African American. It's the highest rates of obesity. If we target them and we get them, again, they don't necessarily have to lose all that weight, but they have to get healthy behaviors, nutrition and physical activity, and they have to be managed during their pregnancy so they don't gain more weight. And this is now done. This is routine in OBGYN offices, but it's a little too late is the problem. It should have happened a long time ago. This is what they're doing in Australia, and I really like this. It's called the Healthy Beginning Study. Louise Barr put this together, and it's a childhood obesity program, and it's for the first time in the house. Community trained nurses went in and basically work with the mother on healthy feeding behaviors in the children and physical activity behaviors in the children. And at 2 years of age, the BMI was significantly lower in the children in the intervention group than in the control group. Now, it doesn't look clinically relevant, but this was a lot, 497 families. So she was the first to show some impact. And this was the key messages it was very simple, that they went into the home and they said, breast is best, no solid for me until 6 months, only water in my cup, I eat a variety of foods every day, and I'm part of an active family. And these materials are free and they're available. So it's something that we should be doing here in the United States. It may be going on in a few key areas, but I think it needs to be standard of care, that mothers have this support. Moving to the next opportunity would be preschoolers. And of course, we have a large number of preschoolers who are in child care centers because the mother's working. And we implemented a study called Knapsack, which was developed by Diane Ward over at North Carolina in conjunction with several other scientists. And the Office of Public Health here, at the time Joni Whitkin was head of it, she's now on our faculty at LSU, and Leslie Lewis they got a federal grant, and he said, what would you like to do with this federal grant to do obesity prevention in child care centers? Leslie said, let's try this knapsack. So we did, and we did it statewide, and we did a randomized control trial, and we had randomized the schools. I think it was 14 child care centers to intervention, 14 to waiting list. They all eventually got the intervention, and we had some pretty good results. We actually looked at the differences in knowledges, attitudes, and self-efficacy in the preschool staff. And in these key areas, overall knowledge, we found that those centers, which we were labeled by the measurement tools of knapsack as more healthy, they actually had better knowledge. Those who were classified as more healthy centers, so a more healthy center would do things like they wouldn't put kids in high chairs. They would serve fruit as a snack. You know, it was a little questionnaire that we gave them. They also knew that new foods such as fruits and vegetables may need to be reintroduced multiple times. 78 of the staff in the healthy centers knew that, but only 42 in the less healthy. Lastly, it is important to let children determine how hungry they feel so that they learn physical hunger cues. 53 versus 23. So the intervention was producing some good results. It was turning some of the centers into healthy centers, and that was definitely related to the staff. So if you target the staff of these centers with this information, you actually can get a changed environment in these child care centers. So we think it's hopeful. And we're trying to continue this, and I know that the Office of Public Health is continuing some of it. All right, so we're going to move now to actual clinical setting. And I know I started late, but if I'm starting to run over, just tell me. I'm going to move through this pretty briefly. This was published in Pediatrics in 2010, and I'm only putting this slide up so that everybody understands, who is not familiar with childhood obesity, that it's okay to put children on diets now. It used to be kind of taboo, and there was a lot of discussion about it, but multi-component interventions are now known to do more good than harm. So those models are what we base something called Trim Kids on, and this is the work that I did for many years over at Children's Hospital. And we used a lot of basic behavioral theories, some of which actually Carolyn Johnson and her team developed over social cognitive theory, because I worked with Sandy Hunter to help me develop some of this. So this is really classic theory, behavioral theory, and motivational techniques. The program was recognized by the U.S. National Cancer Institute, and it was acknowledged by the U.S. Surgeon General. It's a color-coded program where we basically ramp the exercise and the nutrition information based on their level of overweight, and they actually graduate as they achieve a healthier weight. And it's basically, when I showed you that work in my lab, that's how I had classified the children, by these colors. So it's color-coded. This was our first publication, and actually Dr. Blecker's in the room, and he was in this study with me. This was in the year 2000, so it was many years ago. And this wasn't a randomized controlled trial. It was a clinical observation, but we basically started with 71 participants, and 64 had a significant weight loss, and we were able to access 48 of the originals, and they had all maintained their weight loss at 1 year. That's one of the study participants. More recently, I just finished a randomized controlled trial of this program, Trim Kids, but we changed the name of it to Trim Teens, and this was in African-American teenage girls. They were between the ages of 13 and 19, and we randomized them to diet only, exercise only, waiting list control, and then a combined group who had both diet and exercise. All of the intervention groups had behavioral counseling, but the diet versus the exercise, you can see there was a big difference. The exercise group, just like in adults, they gained weight. The diet group actually lost weight, but it wasn't significant compared to the control. The combined group lost 3.42 kilograms after 10 weeks compared to control and compared to exercise. So we really thought this is what would happen, because we know that in most of these, all but one of these girls was above the 99th percentile. So they were all really severely overweight, okay? More interesting, and I'm not going to talk about the first one, because we also measured inflammation with some really unique findings as well. And we had differences between asthmatics and non-asthmatics, because we did have asthmatics in here. But look at the retention and the attendance rate. So the retention rate in the diet only was 84%, and the exercise was only 70%, and 75 in combined. Attendance and exercise was 70, 84, in diet and 83 in combined. They liked the diet part. They didn't have any problem with that because we cook. They like food, you know, and we would show them how to cook healthy foods. But the exercise part was very challenging. What we concluded was that you really need a combined diet plus exercise behavioral counseling intervention to get the most benefit, but that you really need to concentrate on the nutrition part first and slowly dose the exercise. And we now know that fat loss by diet provides the necessary stimulus to motivate them to continue. We had observed this before, and we finally had a study that showed this. I presented this at the ISB NPA meeting, and it's the paper's in review right now, and I'm hoping it gets accepted. So I just want to show you a little bit about what we did. This is our behavioral treatment strategies. This is not new. This is Bandura and Sandy Hunter who helped me develop some of this, Chris von Allman. And it's based on social cognitive theory, and these are actually Sandy Hunter's constructs that she developed with smoking cessation programs, where we use mastery experiences, when we do goal setting, physiologic feedback, using real food for them to feel, teaching them to monitor their heart, working with the parents so that they learn how to handle healthy behaviors in the children, a lot of nutrition education, a lot of fitness education, and targeting the parents as the ones who then role model to the children. We role model to the parents, they role model to the children. And then we had a really nicely developed nutrition education program, which is the same one that we used in the study that I just finished. And again, this is Heidi Schumacher's really brilliant work, and a lot of people have copied what she's done and done it, but it's basic games and starting with very simple topics, and then it's very much based on pedagogy at Bloom's taxonomy. By the end of the year, the kids are actually little dietitians, we call them, because they can do just about anything. But they start off with baby steps, and they learn everything they need to know about nutrition. And let me say, after working with a dietitian for all this time, only a dietitian can impart this information. They're the only ones with enough knowledge. You can do a decent job without them, but if it's a family with overweight children, they need very specific knowledge about nutrition. So according to the U.S. guidelines, which haven't changed since 2008, if a child is very inactive, you need to have an incremental approach to reach 60 minutes per day, which is still the recommended amount for all children, which it should be 2 hours per day, in my opinion. And that you need to increase activity by 10% per week. This came out in 2008, and progressing too quickly is counterproductive and leads to injury. I was already doing this in my program, and this is a book that I published in 2006 with basically just that: duration of exercise increasing over time, frequency of exercise increasing over time. So this is a little complicated, but if you look at severely obese, so that's the red box. In week 1, I asked them to do 20 minutes per session. In week 5, 35 minutes per session of exercise, and in week 10, 50 minutes per session. You go down to frequency, or how many days per week. Look at the red box: 1 day a week in the first week, 3 days a week in week 5, and 5 days a week in week 10. If you dose it this way, by week 10, they're almost doing the guidelines. And I've done this over and over again with great success. And remember, those severely obese kids can't actually exercise when they first come in. So if I tell them to do 1 minute, one day a week of 20 minutes, they can do that. They can achieve it. The other thing that I do is, in the severely obese, we do non-weight bearing activities initially, just for the first 10 weeks. So more swimming and biking. And we really work on their emotional and dietary concerns. And we've been doing that. The literature has kind of followed what we just kind of in our gut figured out by working with so many overweight children. But again, this way they didn't have injuries. They didn't get discouraged because they couldn't accomplish it. If they were obese, we kind of combined weight bearing and non-weight bearing. But I taught them pacing skills so that they could actually exercise for longer periods. And in just the overweight kids, they can do pretty much anything. But again, I worked a lot with training the parents to understand, don't exercise them like adults. This is the kind of activities they like to do, they need to do. And strength was a very, very important component, and this is strength training in a young girl. And this is a huge barrier to children achieving a healthy weight, is they don't have enough muscle mass. They don't have enough muscle, developed muscle to promote healthy metabolism. So, you know, we strongly encourage all children, you know, to have opportunities that they can pull, jump to develop muscular strength and bone strength. There's a lot of scientific support around this. Some of it just came out, 2014, 2011. A lot of great studies showing that the jury is out on strength. Children need to strength train, and you can actually start structured strength training in children as young as 8, as long as it's supervised. But I still get that question from parents, should they not strength train? Is it going to stunt growth? No, not if it's appropriate. I did some research to see, what's the newest stuff in childhood obesity treatment, and there are some smartphone interventions for weight treatment in pediatric obesity, but unfortunately we only have 2 RCTs, randomized controlled trials, but those 2 RCTs did say that if you use e-contact via an iPhone or some other iPad, it's beneficial because it prolongs the engagement of the participants. It decreases dropout during key sustainability phases following intensive weight loss. So it's kind of like exercise. If you're going to use iPhones, use it for sustainability. Maybe not give them the fancy gadgets at first. Hold it out and use it later. Use the standard approaches that first 10 weeks, but then when they start losing interest, oh wait, I'm going to track you with some, fitness trackers now. So it is being researched more, and I know that there are a lot of studies ongoing. But again, those papers are just now coming out. This is all over the place. Active video games in children. Amanda Staino at Pennington just published a nice paper on it showing that it is effective, an effective form of exercise in youth, and it is associated with lower obesity. Unfortunately, it's also associated with compensation in food intake. So people who are playing active video games are eating more. And in one 6-month study that they did in Madison, there was no change in weight. In Dr. Staino's study, she did have a change in weight. But the good thing about these games is that they're similar intensity to light to moderate traditional physical activity such as walking and jogging. So you're going to get the metabolic health benefits from these active gaming. And it's been shown to improve aerobic fitness, blood pressure, and overall physical activity levels. That in turn is going to affect obesity if they have a healthy metabolic weight. So I think they're just like exercise in general. Look at them as a tool to improve metabolic health. I'm going to end with some quick strategies that you can take away for your personal use, or if you work with overweight children, or you're interested in this field and you want to know what's being recommended by all the scientists. This is number 1, family routines. We now have enough research to suggest that families who dine together are less likely to be obese. So reestablish family meals. That's the one thing you can do. The children will take in less soft drinks, less fast food, less saturated fat, and 4-year-olds were 40% less likely to be obese if they limited TV to only 2 hours or less than 2 hours daily, dined as a family at least 6 nights a week, slept at least 10.5 hours on weekdays. And I could actually do 6 more slides on sleep. So sleep is another one. If children are allowed to get adequate sleep, and in children under 12 it's 10.5 hours, they are less likely to be obese. They're less likely to have ADHD, they're less likely to develop substance abuse disorders, they're less likely to do a lot of stuff. That's the science on that. Poor parental modeling. Here's some things that parents can do that are shown in the literature to work. Shop, prepare food, and dine as a family every night. At the grocery store, get the kids to have ownership of the food. Let them pick out their favorite vegetable, their favorite fruit, and let them help you prepare it. Don't be the Nazi police with food. Let them eat out at fast food restaurants once a week. It's okay. And then education. Select one grocery store aisle each week and read labels so that they become familiar with how tricky the marketing is to get them to take in too much sugar and saturated fat. This is a really big one. If you see your child sitting on the sofa and they're munching chips and they're watching, CSI for hours, don't say, if you lay on that sofa and eat those chips, you're going to get as big as a house. Say, hey, you look bored. Would you like to go outside and, take a walk and talk about school? If they don't budge, say, looks like your room needs to be cleaned, the house needs to be vacuumed, or you could go outside and shoot hoops. Give them choices. They'll pick the hoops. Again, there's some scientific support, some really good work by Fisher and Curie along these lines, Whitaker. The mother is the nutritional gatekeeper of the home. This is a quote from Leanne Redmond, who I work with at Pennington. She's the one who just pretty much decides what comes in the home, what gets cooked. These are some quotes from the literature, that the mother's food consumption is the single best predictor. The children's food preferences are correlated with the mother's food preferences. If you serve children more, they will eat more. If you let them serve themselves, they will serve less and eat less. Those that diet cause their children to be preoccupied with weight, and the mother's food choices influence the daughter's choices. There's a lot of literature. There's much less literature in males, but a lot in females. This is a study of that same MET cohort, that silly cohort. This is in adolescents. This was in 50 of them. This was about a year ago that we did this. And you know, if you look at the total caloric intake, it's pretty high in this particular group of, these are males, females, African Americans, and Caucasians. So the total caloric intake on the left. And then you look at maternal body mass index and offspring's total caloric index, and there's a very, very strong, significant correlation. So the heavier the mothers, the more calories they took in. They also took in more of all of the bad macronutrients, but they also took in more of the good macronutrients. So it wasn't the quality of the food, it was that they were eating too much food. And that was what was associated. By the way, this cohort is now 65% overweight. When they were prepubertal, they were 35, and now they're 65. Food as a reward is a biggie. This still goes on in schools a lot. Don't label foods good or bad. Never give food as a reward for good behavior. I did this with my Allison. I taught her that food was either grow tall food or not. So raspberries was grow tall food, and jelly beans were not grow tall food. So I'd have jelly beans, you know, and she'd want jelly beans. I'd say, okay, you can have those jelly beans. They're not going to hurt you, but you're not going to grow. And these raspberries are going to make you grow. And so now she's 24 and all she eats is raspberries. So it works. But there's a lot of scientific support around this. Enton published a lot of really nice information on, you know, food being used to give prizes, to reward, or actually to punish. And it should never be used that way. You shouldn't put a moral connotation on food. But of course, this is what came home in her report card. And this is the honest to God truth. She said, "Mom, what's a donut?" Because I had never had donuts in my house. All right, so we know sugar-sweetened beverages give water for thirst and low-fat milk during meal times, but there is a lot of literature to support that, recent, just out. Skipping breakfast, real quick. We have science to suggest that you should always serve children a healthy breakfast of lean protein, fresh fruit, and whole grain products. Large food portion sizes. It's okay to leave food on the plate. Let your child's appetite determine food intake. Again, a lot of work from Birch, Spruce-Meyer. So watch portion sizes. Don't let children eat in front of the TV. That's mindless snacking. Redirect unhealthy snack selections by giving choices. The first thing I ask the children to do the very first week that they come in is, and I don't order them, I say, I want you to try this. I want you to try to only eat food at the kitchen table, the dining table, or the snack bar. No food in front of the TV. No. And they come back and they all tell me that they can do it, but that Dad doesn't like it. So I think I have to wrap it up. There was only one more that I needed to show you, and that was home gardening. And this is a study showing that actually gardening programs do result in reduced obesity. So it's something we should continue to push through. And we did a study showing that if you do gardening, the parents will have more carrots in the home. And keep the kids out of those strollers. And last but not least, this is my new book if y'all are interested in safe and effective exercise for overweight youth. It's got a lot of information. It just came out in 2014. I really appreciate your attention, and this is actually the work of all these people, not me. So this is the Scientists for Translational Obesity Research in Youth, people from Pennington, School of Medicine, School of Public Health, LSU, and a couple of other universities. And their work is phenomenal. I'm happy to represent them to show this to you all guys. So I know I ran over. I'm sorry because we probably started late, but thank you very much for your time.